In this video, I wanted to give just a little insight on Robert Frost's poem Out Out. And I'll be honest, poetry for me personally, it's not my strong suit. Sometimes poetry can be a bit intimidating for me and things like that. But I do really like Robert Frost's poetry. I find he's a very accessible poet. His poetry on the surface seems pretty simple. I mean, I think you can read Robert Frost's poetry and overall understand what's going on. But also, I like that there's quite a bit to discuss in his poetry. And this is probably one of my favorite poems that he writes. It's a terribly sad poem for me, and it's a poem that I have trouble kind of reconciling even now after reading it, especially when we look at the poem's end and we look at the reaction of the family and the family turning to their affairs after the events of the poem. But let's just go through this quickly and point out some things to take notice of. First of all, the title, Out Out, is a reference. It's called an allusion. An allusion is going to be a reference to something that exists outside of the work itself. And this is actually Frost referencing a Shakespearean play. This comes from a famous soliloquy in Shakespeare's Macbeth. And Macbeth is a great play. I really recommend reading it if you've not checked it out. But Macbeth has a soliloquy coming from Macbeth. He is dealing with the recent suicide of his wife, Lady Macbeth, and his wife, commits suicide out of guilt. And this is a soliloquy in which Macbeth is contemplating kind of the fleeting nature of life and something that we've already visited in our class, an idea we've already visited, is just kind of death when it occurs. Sometimes it occurs when it's least expected. And I find that's a major idea in this poem because we do have in this poem the death of a child. It's a child doing a man's work, but notice that the line says that he is a child at heart. And really, he's a child in age too. So, something that can kind of help us understand this poem a bit, because it seems in today's context this gives some students some trouble understanding exactly what the boy is doing in this poem and why. But this comes from 1916, so you have to understand that we had a completely different society than a society in which child labor was not problematic. I mean, it was a problem, but it wasn't looked at really as problematic. And so we have here a boy who's, I've got two kids and they're young kids, but I can't imagine letting them operate, machinery. But that's what we have going on here. We have a boy who's working for his family. He's chopping wood, probably for the purposes of burning to keep his family hot. Not hot, but warm, for cooking, for heat. This is a very important job that would need to be done, a job that's necessary for the family's survival. And we have here this boy who's doing this job, and notice that he's doing it all day. I mean, it says that the buzzsaw snarled and rattles, and it does this, whether it's running under a load or if it's running light. That nothing happened all day. While the boy is doing this chore, and the events happen right at the end of the day when his work is almost done. And I really wonder if this had been a man rather than a boy, if there would have been a little more care shown, because the mistake that the boy makes, it seems an innocent mistake. It seems a mistake out of ignorance, and it's a mistake out of excitement that his sister comes out and calls supper. And so the boy who has this buzzsaw sets it down while it's still spinning. And that's not a good idea because when he sets the saw down while it's still spinning, in his excitement to be done for the day and go in and eat his dinner, notice that it says that the saw jumps out at the boy. It says that almost as if it were, it says here at the line, when the sister tells him supper, we have some personification. And we'll come back to this personification. It's interesting in this poem that the buzzsaw is so personified, giving human characteristics. It says, at the word, the saw, as if to prove saws knew what supper meant, leapt out at the boy's hand, or seemed to leap. And we'll pause here. We'll come back to what comes next. But here the little boy sets the saw down, and the saw blade hitting the wood jumps out, and the boy, in a defensive gesture, puts up his hand. and of course, neither refuse the meeting. The hand is cut off. Now, let's talk about here. We have the personification of the boy using this saw, and the saw is snarling, and the saw jumps out at his hand almost hungrily, like the saw is ready for dinner. I find this is an interesting line, and I'm not really sure what to do with it. This may be a case of reading too much into it. It says that the boy must have given the hand. However it was, neither refused the meeting. Now think about what it means to give someone a hand. This adds to the personification. Of course, I think literally here the boy raises up his hand to defend himself from the saw. It's almost like he flinches and the saw catches his hand and cuts it off. But also, if you give someone your hand, that's a show of friendship. That's something that you do to greet a friend. You give them your hand. And I think that that might be on purpose here to kind of get this bond between the saw and the boy, to invoke this idea of friendship, which is a bit dark when you see that the boy here, because his hand is cut off, shortly after this, he does die. And one thing you may want to do in the discussion board is explore why could Frost imply a friendship between the saw and the boy with such a terrible outcome that we see in this poem. That's just maybe an idea you want to play around with, maybe you don't. Let's go down a little bit. I like the reaction here. It seems a very genuine reaction, and I hope that you haven't had this, but some of you may have had a situation where you find you hurt yourself, and when you see how bad you've actually hurt yourself, you kind of go into a shockful denial, like it's not so bad, it's not so bad. Maybe you have a crooked finger that's bending away that it certainly should not. And it's interesting here. The boy, his first outcry was a rueful laugh. It's the boy is looking at the wound, and his first reaction is a laugh, which doesn't seem appropriate, but it is because of the shock of it. Also, we have here that the hand is already cut, and the boy here asks his sister, "Don't let him cut my hand off. The doctor, when he comes, don't let him, sister." And then, of course, the poet lets us know the hand was gone already. This is just, I think, to add to the innocence of this boy, that the innocence of the boy can't process what's happened to him. The reality of this situation is too much for him. And the little boy retreats into kind of a denial, because think of here the symbolism in 1916, a young boy, almost a man. How important would his hands be? And this is, I guess a scholar could read into this as a possible castration, as far as his power to be a man is cut off in his youth. That may be reading into it, but I think the boy here basically sees his injury, and he's looking ahead at the life that he could live without his hand, and he realizes how terrible this could be. But, unfortunately, the boy doesn't get to live this life without his hand, because the doctor soon puts him in the dark of ether. He lay and puffed his lips out with breath, and then the watcher at his pulse took fright. No one believed. They listened at his heart, little less nothing. So here, the boy does die. But notice what really gets to me is the reaction of the rest of the family, because the line here says, "That ended it. No more to build on there, and they, since they were not the one dead, turned to their affairs." And this line really just bothers me, because I do take it just makes me angry that the family just kind of goes about the rest of their lives when this little boy has died doing something that really I think most of us today, of course, hopefully well fed and warm, would say that this little boy had no business doing. But that's not really fair of me, because I am reading this in a different time period and different social context than it was originally written. But it still just bothers me that the little boy's death is not lamented at all. If you think back to the poem we read, um, Dulce decorum est, it's that lack of glory. In Dulce et decorum est, excuse me, we have the soldier who dies in the gas attack, and all they do is throw his body in the back of the cart. There's no word spoken. There's no uh, sign of respect or anything like that. They just toss his body in the back of the cart. And I feel like that's kind of what they're doing here, that the little boy, they kind of toss him aside and just continue on with things. Now, feel free to talk about on the discussion board either why that may also upset you, or help me kind of come to terms with maybe creating some sympathy for the family of the boy, as far as why it may be necessary for the family, since they are not the ones dead, to turn to their affairs. It's I don't want to say it's a simple poem. I guess it's simply written. It seems it's accessible. How about that? I think this is an accessible poem, but it does kind of, I think, do a good job exploring human emotion, exploring something that we all remember, the innocence of childhood, and also brings up a darkness of the world that can corrupt that innocence of childhood, whether it be through labor or whether it be through premature death. Premature death, basically, when what happens when a child is forced to do a man's work, and by that, of course, we mean the innocence of youth is corrupted by the necessity of reality, and the dangers of adulthood. So I hope you enjoy the poem. I look forward to seeing your insights on it inside the discussion board. Thank you.